I'm pretty sure the new holiday Hulu original movie Nutcrackers is an adjacent sequel to Reality Bites. It stars Ben Stiller as a company guy yuppie named Michael who stammers his way through conversations and avoids the hard things, and also dazzles us with his extensive knowledge of mineral water. Just as Mike is on the heels of closing the biggest deal of his career, he's pulled away from his bachelor life in the big city to a farm in rural Ohio in order to take care of his recently orphaned nephews. What Mike thought would be a quick trip turns into an unexpected adventure and discovers the big hearts behind the boys' mischief. In addition to Stiller, this stars Linda Cardellini and four real-life brothers, Homer, Ulysses, Arlo, and Atlas Janson. Now, it's directed by David Gordon Green, who's taken a break from his horror attempts. Now, the story and the setup, they're straightforward, and they don't provide, or really even need, a lot of exposition or explanation. Stiller has been somewhat estranged from his sister and her husband, who both recently died, leaving Stiller's Mike to be the guardian of their four boys, and they have been raised outside of what would be traditionally considered the norm. I mean, think Captain Fantastic, but with a more permanent home and less Bear Grylls activities. The kids are homeschooled. They run amok on their farm, basically being a kid that any Gen Xer could relate to, doing things that would probably get us hurt, but were exceedingly fun. Now, Mike's the fish out of water in the story, coming from the buttoned-down and affluent city, driving his Porsche and not having the first clue about raising or even taking care of young kids. The storyline, it is a very obvious one, and it's easy to dismiss this because the start of the film, it's a bit rough and it takes a while to find its groove. Now, it doesn't become some masterpiece by the end, but once everything begins to click between the cast and the story dives into a little of the emotion as well as the slapstick, it becomes engaging and heartwarming. Now, according to IMDb, this is the first acting gig for any of the Janson brothers. And while it is a little evident at times at the lack of experience, this also provides them with genuine and believable naivete and joy as they create their characters. There are huge smiles the boys have as they're creating all sorts of chaos. And I can't help but think that this isn't them acting, but just genuinely having a blast on set. And there's a scene in the trailer that shows Michael homeschooling them, and the boys have chosen the topic of sex as that day's lesson. The conversations, while very juvenile, and I mean, come on, these are kids, they're believable, and they made me chuckle because of the silly earnestness. But outside of the humor, they're also able to bring warmth and vulnerability to their characters, creating strong but hurting kids that work to soften Michael. There are some sequences that tug at the heartstrings and then ask the boys to conjure up palpable grief. And these are good, but they would be even more impactful if the story would allow a bit more development. Now, thankfully, the movie does make up for some of these instances as it gets towards the end of the story. Linda Cardellini plays a social worker who is working to get a permanent guardian for the boys, hoping that Mike is going to be the one to step up and then also trying to convince him to do so. I liked her dynamic with Stiller in this because she's not used as a love interest to manipulate him into doing the right thing. I mean, we can see that there is a bit of chemistry and maybe even attraction between them, but that's kept at bay within the storyline, allowing any growth or personal improvement on Mike's part to be realized on his own. I loved that this movie kept improving as it went along. I mean, it wasn't a static story, even though the narrative was completely predictable and obvious. And I don't know if that was the comfort level of the boys just raising, in which in turn then increased their confidence, or if the direction finally kicked in along with the cast gelling to then create a cohesive and believable family dynamic. And while I wasn't sure or even sold in the first 20-ish minutes, by the end I was smiling and satisfied at the conclusion. I mean, yeah, it is a dreamy or utopian outlook on the circumstances, but there's zero wrong with a story choosing positivity over melancholy. Is this wholly believable? Not necessarily all of the circumstances, but the relationship growth and the bonds, those definitely are. Now, probably the largest shortcoming of this is the work dilemma that Mike faces. He's supposed to be back for this high-level meeting, and so we watch him have back-and-forth conversations on the phone with his boss. And I get that it's supposed to create the conflict for his character, working to make him decide between closing the deal or looking after the boys. But that's already established just simply by him being ripped from his posh single life to then look after four young'uns in the country. And there's even internal conflict between him and one or two other coworkers, but we've never seen or met them. So they're inconsequential and they don't deserve the story's attention. This is an easy watch at 1 hour and 44 minutes, keeping the pacing mostly brisk and moving, especially after the first 20 or so minutes. The development on some of the characters and their relationships, it's lacking, like the crush one of the brothers has on a girl, but it's not detrimental to the storytelling. And I think there are additional arcs within the line that could have been examined to create an even more powerful dynamic between Stiller and Homer Janson, allowing for deeper highs and lows that the characters share. But even when it's not fully delved into, the relationship, it's still strong and relatable. I also like that Mike gets to share some quiet and introspective moments with each of the boys, showing us how he's opening up and letting his heart warm to the idea of looking after them instead of just searching for the first out he can. So overall, Nutcrackers is a sweet and optimistic story, building on their increasingly strong dynamic between Ben Stiller and the newcomer Janson brothers. While the story itself isn't unique, the charm of the characters, mixed with the relatable humor and touching conversations, make for an enjoyable holiday watch. Some story elements lack development, and the entire production does take a bit to find its footing, but once it does, the endearing dynamic of the brothers takes hold, and it's going to put a smile on your face and warm your heart. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, not really any violence. I give Nutcrackers 3.5 out of 5 couches. So have you seen any good holiday-themed movies recently? I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.